I'll be honest with you, love Robbie Williams as a singer, not sure I want him to do art. Adrien Brody won a couple of Oscars. It's probably okay that he's not skilled at painting. Both Adrien and Robbie have art shows on right now. Critics will tell you the art isn't particularly good. The question is, how much does that actually matter? I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Andy Armstrong is here. Eddy Frankel is here. They've both gone to see these shows, and boy, do they have thoughts about them. Welcome to Commotion, y'all. How's it going?
Hello.
Hello. It's nice.
Hi, how's it going?
It's nice to have you here. I'm delighted to talk about this. And Eddy, I'm trying to restrain myself from singing angels at you, so I'm not going to do that. But you went and you saw Robbie Williams' art show in London. It's called Radical Honesty. Before we get into what you thought of it, like hold that for a moment. Could you just maybe describe for us the artworks that you see when you go see Radical Honesty?
I absolutely can. The majority of the show is made up of works on canvas, and they're sort of computerized line drawings mixed with text. So there's self-portraits, there's images of mixtapes, there's rainbows and pretty fields with sort of positive affirmations written across them. There's also a sculptural element. There's an enormous hoodie covered in pockets for different anxiety medications. And there's a chair right in the middle of the gallery that's for introverts. So just in case any introvert is feeling awkward, they can just go sit right in the middle of the gallery. But like I said, the bulk of it is this text and word combination. So it sort of looks like cartoons. And then the text that's included on it is stuff like there's a street sign with one sign pointing left, and it says you and your limiting self-beliefs, and to the right it says the you that you could still be, so it's I described it in my review as a sort of mixture of therapy speak, greeting card banter, and positive affirmations.
What I like about this, Eddy, is that I said, please hold what you thought of it for a moment. And none of that was kept out of the descriptions. Like it was the tone, one could read, hey, you did not experience a transformational time at the gallery. What did you think of Robbie Williams' show?
Yeah, I had a bit of a tonal sneer there, but it's quite. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
It's built into me.
Yeah.
I didn't like it, and I should preface this by saying that I'm very happy for Robbie Williams to make art. I think making art's a wonderful thing. It's a great way to express yourself, and I don't want him to stop. The difference is here, and he didn't do this in a small commercial gallery. He didn't do this in the privacy of his own home. He did this in an institution in London that considers itself one of the main art galleries, and put his work next to Tracy Emin and Jean-Michel Basquiat and Andy Warhol. So if you do that, you sort of deserve to have an art critic come and have a look at it. And yeah, it's sort of objectively heinous. The line drawings are like incredibly badly done, and all of the it's like they're poor drawings. There's one that's like a very bad drawing of a plane pulling a banner across a blue sky that says, you are self-centered, but what is self to be centered on? It's slightly stomach turning. In general, it's all that sort of. Some of it's quite self-deprecating in the way that Robbie Williams is. He's such a charming, self-deprecating bloke. But then the rest of it is all those sorts of positive affirmations, mixtapes that says, that say we are soul-tied on them. It's really like a live, love, laugh sign, but in a gallery, and you're forced to pay £20 to go look at it and think it's brilliant.
I can tell that you don't. I can tell that you don't have a live, love, laugh sign in your house. But I'll tell you this. What I like about art critics is that fundamentally they are different from film critics in the sense that, like, when we get film critics in here, they're often like, well, you can see they were really trying for this. And it's a relief to just have an art critic come and be like, it's not good. It shouldn't maybe exist. Happy that people are doing art. What is it doing next to Basquiat? I want to come back to that point in a moment. Annie, I want to go to you because you went to the opening for Adrien Brody's show, and his show is called Made in America. Could you walk me through what you saw? And please feel no need to hide how you felt in the tone of what you're describing. But tell us what you saw.
Totally. It's interesting we've already brought up Basquiat because Adrien Brody's artwork is also very inspired by Basquiat. But his show is mostly paintings, large-scale paintings that have a lot of street art aesthetic, a lot of cartoons. There's my favorite one was Scrooge McDuck holding an AK-47, which is just very made in America. And he also has two multimedia works. One is an experiential work where he has these tables set up of like Hubba Bubba and different chewing gums, and you chew the gum and then you put it on the wall and you can make your own piece of art out of chewing gum, which is actually pretty disgusting when you think about how many people are going through there because there's so many fans of Adrien Brody. And then he also has a sound installation, which are his like reggae beats that he made.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. The paintings are incredible. I think he describes it as he's trying to capture the rhythm of New York City, which is definitely goes back to how Basquiat painted and how he was able to capture truly like rhythm.
Yeah.
I would say that Adrien Brody didn't feel the beat quite as succinctly as Jean-Michel Basquiat.
That sounds like an understatement, but okay. What did you think of the show in general? Your experience of Adrien Brody's show?
Like, I mean, yeah, it's terrible. Like, I could get into like the kind of brass tacks of it, and like just some of the screen prints that he made are really like poor quality, low res images. But then there's also just like a startling lack of creativity where everything that's in there looks like something else I've already seen, but far worse. And yeah, I mean, like, I think it's very uncanny. I have kind of a different experience from Eddy, whereas like, it sounds like Robbie's, his like self-awareness is part of why his art kind of feels like maybe a little bit more charming. But with Adrien Brody, it's just like, I respect his acting career so much, and I respect his acting choices so much, the projects he's chosen.
Yeah.
He's been able to be so understated as an actor. He's chosen like really elegant projects, and his artwork is just so clunky. It's so flat-footed. It's so obnoxious to look at. It's uncanny how this duality exists in one person. It's really amazing.
Okay, again, the thing that I'm appreciating about art critics is being like, well, we can actually like appreciate an artist in another form, whether it's Adrien Brody as an actor who's incredible at that job, and Robbie Williams as a singer, and still sort of look at their art shows and say, this ain't it. This is not the thing that you should be doing with your career. And Eddy, as far as I know, like these men are not trained artists. They're not trained painters. That is not a thing that they do. Yet their works are sort of being shown in these galleries, in spaces that have a lot of cultural capital. And I guess my curiosity is like, what does this do for them? What is the thing that they're sort of seeking to do? And obviously you can't speak for them, but you try to sort of speculate. But if you're already an established artist in a field where you actually like have a fair bit of respect and credibility, what does actually seeking this, what does it do for you?
Yeah, I think, it feels like a very genuine form of expression. Like, I don't think either one of them is being particularly cynical. I think they're genuinely trying to express themselves through art. And that's something that we can all do in our spare time. And just that for most of us, if we do watercolors on a Saturday, they stay locked away in our shed. And they've put them in, they've turned their hobby, a really lovely hobby, like go for it. They've turned that into something consumable. And I think that, and also something on a very large stage. I think that brings with it quite a lot of problems in terms of perception of art, and something, people sneer at art so much, and this doesn't help with that.
But also, I want to go back to that larger point that you made earlier about the idea of the gallery space, because if you're putting a Robbie Williams next to a Basquiat, you are saying these belong visually in the same plane, in the same context. What do you think that does for the art world, Eddy?
I think it's incredibly detrimental and unhelpful. Just speaking about the UK, arts funding has been decimated. Opportunities for young artists to exhibit and to have gallery representation and to have successful careers are almost nil. Artists in the UK, all like the vast majority, live below the poverty line. And then someone shows up, Robbie Williams himself said that these drawings take him 20 seconds to do, shows up with his hobby and gets a quote unquote major exhibition. I don't think that's a hugely helpful thing. And then on a slightly wider scale, I think, the whole I could do that thing that people have when they see a Jackson Pollock drip painting, the way that the general public perceives contemporary art, especially, as being like lazy and easy and just like waffle. I think this doesn't help. If you see the world's laziest drawings put up with the world's most useless affirmations in a massive gallery, you think, well, this is all I have to do to make art?
Hmm.
Great. It means nothing. And I think that's really a genuinely negative thing that's come out of something that I understand for him is positive, but it is genuinely a negative.
And I think that's a good transition to talk about a term that you spend a bit of time defining, which is red chip art. You know, like this idea of if blue chip art is the Jackson Pollock, red chip art is something different. And do you want to maybe explain what that is and how it applies to the art that these two are making?
Yeah, red chip art is I would define it as it stands directly in opposition to the old guard of what we consider to be blue chip art. And I think it's very much defined by a similar aesthetic that both Robbie and Adrien's art shares, which is it has this kind of street art aesthetic. It's very easily understood. It isn't really trying to exist in the same canon of art history that, like, say, your Joan Mitchells and your Donald Judds are. And it's a little bit, I mean, crypto has is a huge component in it.
Yeah.
Technology, like just like the proliferation of technology and art, it has a huge part in it. And I think that it looks cheap, and I think that that is what invites a lot of people into it. And it's like tech and celebrity all intersecting at once, and it just creates this very like unappealing mixture of aesthetics. Like it's very just difficult to look at. Yeah.
People were sort of talking about the NFT, some of the NFT art that was sort of going really popular in the past couple of years. You know, I think one piece was like, this was the most that anyone's ever paid for an art piece, and it was sort of an NFT art piece. And the value of that has nothing to do with, you know, the art that you're looking at in front of you. It has everything to do with, you know, the attention that you're able to get because it becomes like part meme in a sense, you know, like I feel like everything that I saw in the images from the Adrien Brody show or from the Robert Williams show is like, oh, that's understandable and replicatable, and people can kind of look at it and go like, oh, there's nothing to analyze here. It's actually kind of like all in your face. Is that a little bit what you mean?
Yeah, that totally. Yeah, it's like it's native to the internet. Like it's really made from how the internet talks about art or how the internet looks at just aesthetics is how I would define it, which I mean, I think both of these art shows seem to be in that dialogue.
Eddy, it's come to my attention that we are maybe reaching peak Robbie Williams here. Like, it's not just the gallery show. It's not just the movie. It's got a new song out. There's a documentary. Is there something to be said about the idea that he's like, I'm finally returning. I just want to take up some space in the world again. And here's all the ways where you can meet and find me. Like, are we being too harsh on the guy? Or is by exhibiting his art in this gallery, is he sort of saying, you know what, it's fair to criticize him alongside the greats?
Yeah, I think it's exactly like it's a contextual point. So if he's putting himself in the context of, you know, so he must have got the invitation and someone said to him, do you want to show your terrible drawings right next to a Basquiat and a Warhol and a Tracy Emin? Do you want to do that? And he went, that sounds like a good time. I'm in. I deserve that opportunity. Let's go. Which is an incredible, you know, I described it as that, you know, it's not only self-important, but totally lacks any self-awareness. You know, he thought that was a good move.
Yeah.
So, I mean, have we reached peak Robbie Williams? I mean, in the UK, not really. We love him. You know, he's so charming. He's everywhere. You know, his songs get sung at the football. So not really. But I think, you know, this is an example of someone, you know, having too much out there. There's just having too much art out there, because the right amount of art would have been zero. And we've ended up with too much. So, yeah.
Any last word to you on this? But these guys, again, they have everything, but they want to do this. Is there something about the way that society treats or remembers or thinks about visual artists that they're aspiring to, you think? What is it about that sort of class of people that makes them say, you know what, I want to be a part of whatever those people have?
It makes total sense to me that an actor would want to be an artist, because I think you're completely driving the car when you're an artist, when you're a visual artist. But when you're an actor, you're always telling somebody else's story by way of a director, a producer's, like a whole team of people who are telling you how to move, act. You're basically a puppet. So it makes sense to me that it would be really fulfilling for an actor to want to create art that is just from them and is just their expression. But it just seems like they had their training wheels taken off a little too quickly. But I think that what you would get out of it, I mean, what anybody would get out of being an artist and being regarded as an artist is it's like being tapped into an intelligentsia. I think if you're an if you're an actor, you're a puppet. You're not totally defining your own words. You're not always like improvising whatever you're expressing. But as far as art goes, I think that you get a lot of credit for your intelligence and your philosophical prowess and your ability to execute on that.
Well, I can't say that their shows have given them that, but I am glad that we have had this conversation. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here, you guys.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you. Andy Armstrong is a columnist with ArtNet. She's in New York City. Eddy Frankel is an art critic who writes for The Guardian. He's in London. Adrien Brody's Made in America closes at the Eden Gallery in New York this Saturday. Robbie Williams' Radical Honesty is now at the MoCo Museum in London. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. I don't know if you've heard this song or not, but I'm going to tell you what it is. It's from 1982, and it's called Dance After Curfew by Toronto musician Jeff Pluman. He's better known as Nash the Slash. Through the 70s and 80s, Nash developed this cult following in Canada and the UK for this music that combined prog rock and classical and new wave and electronic music. But he was maybe best known as a guy who performed most of the time, completely covered in bandages and sunglasses like some kind of punk version of the Invisible Man. Nash the Slash died back in 2014 at the age of 66, but what we're seeing now is this new wave of renewed interest in his life and his work. There's a documentary and tribute album that are coming later this year, and just last week there was a release of Cutthroat, which is his guide that he wrote on how to navigate the music industry. He wrote that back in 1997, and it's coming out now. Paul Myers is here to tell us why Nash the Slash is rising again. Paul, welcome back to the show, friend.
Hey, good to be back. Good to see you.
Nice to have you here. Listen, for folks who maybe don't know anything about Nash the Slash, maybe you can set us up by talking about your first encounter with his work. How did you come to Nash the Slash?
I used to watch this show that was on the educational TV in the Toronto area. TV Ontario was the channel at the time, and they
still is. Yes.
Oh, I wasn't sure. I haven't, yeah. And they had a guy named Rainer Schwartz who was like an FM DJ, the classic 70s FM DJ, except it was a TV show, kind of ahead of its time. And he would play like avant-garde music from Europe, and Frank Zappa would come on if he was in Toronto, and Nash the Slash came on one night, and this, like you said, dressed like Claude Rains in The Invisible Man with like a top hat but bandages, playing an electric violin with all kinds of echo boxes and a primitive beatbox, which I think might have been like a rhythm ace from an organ, but it was all this soup that sounded, in hindsight, sounded like German rock. It sounded like Kraftwerk or Can, but also sounded like a little bit like Robert Fripp, jagged guitar tones, and he was just mysterious and kind of horror music, but also kind of edgy. So it wasn't quite the dreamy progressive rock that you might have seen at the time. But so what I didn't know is it was kind of cutting edge for its time, and that was my first exposure. And then we saw him live, but go ahead.
I was gonna say I like you reacting to mystery. I like the idea that like you see this guy and you're like, well, I don't know what this is, but I'm in, I'm drawn, I'm interested in this. But also we should just contextualize, like at the same time that Nash was sort of establishing himself as this underground character in the late 70s, he also did have some mainstream success through this band. So that's Phasers on Stun. That is a big song from 1978, the Toronto rock band FM, because you could name a band FM and not worry about your Google search results at the time. But Nash the Slash was for a brief period of time in FM. Nash is someone who's kind of like earned the respect of a bunch of different communities, right? So like he works in progressive rock, but also all this like really refined musicianship didn't really necessarily alienate him from like the world of punk, for example. What did you think it was about Nash the Slash that made him work in a bunch of different contexts?
Well, it's so on the one hand, he was very trimmed down on in FM. He would play that mandolin you heard, not through a fuzz box, So at the same time, his own jagged music of his own had this element of horror music, but it was also very compositionally like progressive rock, but it had the edge, so he could literally play the club called The Edge, which Gary Topp and Gary Cormier, who are unsung heroes generally in the Toronto history of avant-garde and counterculture, they would book him regularly to play solo shows. So the punks literally were seeing him as part of their regular week of, so while the punk bands were wearing their tattered hearts on their sleeves, he was doing this theatrical thing that, at the same time we had this scene in Toronto that was showing art house movies, and the original Nosferatu and Un Chien Andalou, and Jeff Nash would go up and play live soundtrack to it, instrumental soundtrack. So he was hitting all these different cultural buttons at the same time. None of them, by the way, very lucrative.
Yeah.
And like FM was probably the most successful thing he did. And they only did that briefly. And they let him wear his bandages, which I thought was very interesting.
What I like about this conversation is like this idea of maybe reverence for counterculture that we've maybe lost a little bit, or don't necessarily pay attention to counterculture the same way that we once kind of did. But not only did you go see him a lot, but also like your own band actually opened some shows for him. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about the guy behind the mask. What was he like?
Well, here's the thing. I always say I saw him without his bandages, but I never saw him. Like he's a guy that you could know, but not really like I've never spoken to him on the phone. I'd never gone for a drink with him. But backstage, he was the most friendly guy. Now we were playing this 100 degrees. It was like really, really hot in the middle of summer at a place called the Key to Bala. I don't even know if it's still there. It might still be there.
TVO's still there. Key to Bala still there. Both
nice
still.
to know so many things are still there. That's good.
Yeah.
But so my band's like a real band, like a band, and I'm backstage, and I sort of knew him from the punk clubs. So, but I was backstage with him with no bandages on. His face was like really red because he had been in this sweltering heat wearing those bandages on stage.
Of course.
He was and I have this photograph of me and him on a deck somewhere, the back of the club, and he's just like some dude in the cottage country, and I'm sure if he left the club, nobody would know it was him. That it was Nash. I heard he was very dark, and that the whole darkness of his music. This is coming out in these recent works. Yeah. That there was a lot of a much darker side to him. And that, obviously the financial part really got to him after a while. And that's when he wrote a manual to the music business that I would say has aged particularly well, in that the bitterness of the music business is still prevalent, right?
I mean, it's called Cutthroat, right? Like that's an extraordinary thing to title a manual to the music business in 1997. When you sort of think about like the idea that like people are sort of revisiting that now, but also there is a documentary coming out, tribute album coming out. What do you think it is that we're looking for in Nash the Slash's legacy that we're kind of mining that's so relevant to us right now?
I think it's because, Canada's always celebrating and maybe exploring its identity. And one of the things that shows, I think, a healthy identity of a culture is when we can recognize our eccentricities and our sort of outliers. And I think Nash is Nash was a genuine outlier and genuinely mysterious. And he created a theatrical treat for everyone. That was, like I say, a horror movie meets punk meets progressive rock. And I think it's nice to have our own weirdos, if you will. And I say that with all the affection, like to say we have a weirdo. We had, and we, just the same way, like that, I've been seeing films about the Canadian Caribbean music community that might not have been pushed by a monoculture back in the 70s, and now we're like, wow, we have that too. We have all these different outs, and the way we're celebrating our First Nations people and all the things that weren't celebrated back then. Now we can go, okay, let's rethink this, because our Canada includes a whole bunch of voices, including the eccentric guy in bandages.
I love that way of putting it. With about a minute left to go here, Paul, what's your advice for anybody who's maybe a newcomer who's like, you know what, I want to get started in the world of Nash the Slash? Where should they start?
I think some of his indie albums from the beginning are cool. I imagine there's probably going to be a compilation coming out or something that will start you that. But maybe just listen to FM. But the FM was not indicative of his theatricality. Children of the Night was an album that I remember getting a lot of airplay on, local Toronto radio. I think it might have gone national in college rock level. CBC probably played it. Children of the Night was probably one of the more indicative of his tone.
I think that's a great place to leave it here. But Paul, I really appreciate your time, man. Also, I really appreciate this advice to say, hey, can we revisit and celebrate our weirdos? I think that's a thing we don't do enough. So thank you so much for doing that with us today.
Always a pleasure, Elamin.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Paul Myers is a writer and the host of the Record Store Day podcast in San Francisco. Cutthroat, How to Get Started in the Music Business, a book by the late Nash the Slash, can be ordered right now through Bandcamp. That is it for the show today. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. The show called Commotion will be back tomorrow. Also, by the way, if you've got a minute, we would love it if you would follow us on Instagram. We are Commotion CBC. You can find us on YouTube where you can see this entire conversation, should that be your jam. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.